We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask, why?
I'm Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
So Gaia, what's our topic today?
So today's topic, compared to our last couple, is going to be a little bit more nebulous. There's not as much direct research, at least not in the angle that we're going to be taking today, and instead we're going to be talking about player psychology. Let's word it like that. So today's episode is going to be all about understanding who you are as a player, and if you're making content, understanding the people who will be playing your game.
And seeing if you can, if you're creating a game, whether that's a tabletop RPG or if you're developing, a video game, whether those things are applicable to your game and what kind of players your audience is.
Yeah, exactly. So to give a bit of a layout of today's episode, the first thing we're going to do is talk about a bit of the history of understanding who players are. We're then going to talk a little bit about games that have done it well and of games that have done it poorly, and then how you can incorporate into your own gaming life in the examples more of stuff like TTRPGs, for example.
Yeah, and then hopefully this will bleed into our episode about session 0 for tabletop RPGs. This is like your player introspection. You've been invited into a game and you're going to seriously think about the kind of player that you are.
Yeah, exactly. So Vi, I know I've been talking to you for the past couple days about the history of understanding your players.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that might be a bit of a good way to open today. So back in the grand old days of the 1980s and 1990s, games were simple.
Yes. Okay.
In particular, back then, they were described as...
I'm going to say there are some games that are not mechanically simple, but...
Yeah, they were text-based and Mario, and that's about it. And, Pac-Man and Pong, but you get the idea.
I'm thinking first edition, THACO D&D.
Whoa. I knew most of those words. So, back in the day, a popular form of online gaming was known as MUDs, or multi-user dungeons. Think of it like... Imagine playing a text-based dungeon crawler with people online in real time.
I actually actively don't want to think about that.
That sounds terrifying.
It sounds bad.
That's the origins of modern MMOs and the origins of, today's topic. So in studying MUDs many years ago, a researcher of the name Richard Bartle...
Richard is good.
Richard's good, but Richard Bartle attempted to figure out why people played games. That was his topic. Why do you play this game? If people were to make more games, because, expansions weren't really a thing at the time, what would you want? And that turned out to be a harder question than expected, but easier than pure chaos.
Yeah.
So players had this tendency to give kind of similar answers, but in multiple, very wide-ranging categories. We're talking 4 or 5 major summaries of players to summarize, I think 80 plus people that he researched. But these categories were very different.
Was this man British?
I think so, actually.
Okay, cool.
I can double check while we're doing this. Yes, he was.
This seems like a very British...
It does have a British feel, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So he asked the players why they played the game, and he was able to eventually summarize the results into 4 categories, which we'll mention here. He gave the categories of achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. Today, you'd probably think of it like the completionists, the, explorers, the cooperative players, and the griefers.
Yeah, that's pretty close, yeah.
That's pretty much what he was going for.
What I really like is that so you can kind of think of this like a political compass, just in the way that these things are organized. On the x-axis, you have where is your focus. So on the left-hand side of that x-axis, you have player-centric focus, and on the right-hand axis, you have world focus. And then on the y-axis, you have interested in interacting at the bottom, and then interested in acting at the top.
Yeah. So he attempted to put all players onto this axis, and it played out very similar to the political compass, and he was able to use it to inform early game design. Now, we're not going to sit here and pretend that model is how you, as a DM or as a player, should try to understand yourself or the players around you. Admittedly, it's a little outdated.
we joked about this being the Myers-Briggs for gamers personality quiz. And I think for all personality tests, like, we like to try to categorize people, but people kind of evade boxes.
Yeah.
But, like, show me a permanent state of the self for, like, first of all.
Yeah, admittedly, I don't think you can.
You can't. I'm going to say that, like, when I sit down to play a game on Tuesday, I feel like I'm a different person than who I am on my other game on a Thursday. Like,
Yeah.
those are different people.
Or in our games on Fridays, admittedly.
Yeah, that's a whole different...
That's a whole different category.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
So, because of these types of criticisms, there have been other systems kind of put forward for Bartle's taxonomy. There's one that added implicit versus explicit style of play, which I don't even know how to exactly explain that one. I think explicit is like interacting with the game itself, and implicit is like an internal need.
Yeah, this sounds a lot like when you talk about like goal-oriented things, like, oh, is this an extrinsic goal, right? Or is this an extrinsic reward, like, oh, I get money for completing that goal? Or is it intrinsic, like, I feel good about solving that puzzle?
So I just went to check my notes while we're talking about
Yeah.
it. And when you add explicit and implicit in the killer category, the implicit version is literally called the griefer. But the explicit one, which is to have a good reputation, is called the politician.
Okay. So you're either like a murderer or you're like sneaky.
Or a politician.
Yeah.
I love that. But there was other ones like planner and opportunist, scientist and hacker and networker and friend.
That's fun. I just want to go back to the first four and sort
Yes.
of put them on our political compass. So a killer interested in acting and in a player-centric world. An achiever is interested in acting, but is interested in the world.
Yeah, so a killer wants to act on the players.
Yes.
It doesn't actually have to be necessarily killing players, but it's not cooperation. It's PvP. They want
Yes.
to interact with players directly. When the achiever is all about, well, achieving something in the game, acting on the world.
This feels like a killer kind of like in these broader categories. A killer would probably prefer, a first-person shooter kind of game, whereas an achiever would probably be interested in something like Skyrim, where you have your own sort of world that you work up and levels for, but you're not really, one-on-one.
Yeah,
with
or even
other
a game
people.
like Legend of Zelda, which has a very large speedrunning
Yeah.
community.
That's fair. Socializers, on the other hand, interested in interacting with players, and explorers who are interested in interacting with the world.
Yeah, so socializers are the type of people you would find in the main hub in World of Warcraft, talking to you, maybe sharing a little bit of loot and having a good time. And the explorers are the people who find those nooks and crannies in the map with secret items.
These two, to me, feel like people who play Animal Crossing versus people who play Breath of the Wild. Like, both of these seem like cozy gamer vibes to me.
Yeah, they both do have that vibe.
Where do you think you fit in these original four?
So most often I have fit into the achiever category. I'm not particularly worried about the multiplayer aspects of things,
Yeah.
but I love achieving great feats in a game and feeling successful. But I've never been that big of an achievement hunter, never been all focused on 100% in games. Though I say that every single time I finish a game, I immediately open the achievement list.
Yeah.
So how about you? Where would you put yourself on this?
I think I have to put myself, because of the everything about me, into explorers.
Yeah.
Like, I really am interested in the world. I don't really care very much about interacting with other players in a game. But I am interested in trying to figure out, like, all of those, like, little niche things about a world.
Right. Now, I will say that these categories do have their own problems. For example,
course.
no one would actually use the category Explorer today because in the original version, glitch hunters were considered explorers. And I don't know how to say that I don't think that's an accurate description.
Hang on. Because let's say for a moment, I'm going to assign Explorer to Breath of the Wild for a minute.
Let's
I'm
go
going to
for it.
make those two things the same. I know that there are people who love that game and love finding and exploiting the glitches in it. But I understand that these are two fundamentally different mechanics than what originally was being studied.
Yeah, because the problem is analyzing game mechanics and exploring the world are two very different things. And in Bartle's original taxonomy, he mixed them together.
Yeah.
Which modern research has shifted things around a little bit. So, yeah. Now, there are other categories that have been proposed. One researcher named John Radoff has put forward that it should be immersion, cooperation, achievement, and competition, which honestly makes sense to me. Immersion feels better than exploring, and achievement really should be the one that's picking up the game mechanic discussion.
That's fair. That's a good replacement, I think.
Yeah, but going into these systems any deeper, we'll start to miss the forest for the trees. So instead of going really further into this, allow me simply to ask you, Vi, why do we care about these categories?
I think these help you clue into what kind of game you might pick up and enjoy, right? So if you, as a listener, just think a minute for a second on these 4 categories. Killer, achiever, socializer, explorer, based on what we just said those were 4. Kind of pick one in your head. Those sorts of games that you might pick up, you might be drawn to because of that category, right? If your friend describes a game to you and they're like, yeah, you do this and I really enjoy that about the game, you can go, okay, does this fit my want to interact with other players? Or does this fit my want to interact with the world?
Yeah, and in a single-player sense, the killer would still be someone who interacts very directly with NPCs, and the socializer would be working with NPCs. Although socializer is definitely the hardest category for single-player games, so you might find yourself drawn to Reddit threads or forum boards.
Yeah.
Or posting tutorials online. Those are all single-player expressions of socializer.
Doing a podcast about...
Maybe we put ourselves in the wrong category.
Anyway, right? So even there we can see the overlap of what we enjoy doing in the gaming world.
Yeah, and I want you as a listener to imagine your category for a second and think about where it is. So let's go through a couple of these. If you're a killer in terms of your category, you think you will enjoy fighting against other players, you're competitive, or you enjoy like very high combat style scenes or large puzzles to do much of the same task, you might find yourself enjoying games like Call of Duty or Mortal Kombat, for example. Or you might enjoy arenas in games like Skyrim and Oblivion, or even in games like World of Warcraft. Instead, let's say you put yourself in the achiever box. You might find yourself attracted to games like, well, Pokemon, because of the speedrunning community. We can say the same for Legend of Zelda and Sonic. But you also might find yourself attached to games that have very extensive achievement lists. So you might find yourself attached to even some games like the Persona series, which have some very hard to get achievements in them.
I'm stuck trying to figure out where to put Dark Souls on here.
Dark Souls tends to fall in a mix of killer and achiever.
Yeah, I was kind of leaning toward achiever. And then Elden Ring for sure going into something like explorer.
Yeah, but a big thing about those games is they do mimic old MMOs in a single-player style.
Yeah.
And this system was meant to talk about MMOs as a whole. People would play one game and still fit into one of these 4 categories when it was made. But let's say you're a socializer. What game would you like to play then? Do you have any ideas, Vi?
Ooh, well, I was going to say Animal Crossing because you can, like, that's a very social game. But even something as simple as, like, Among Us or, like, Jackbox.
Yeah.
Those count as video games.
Or to throw you completely for a loop, you might also play The Sims.
Yes.
If you're in that category.
Yep, for sure.
Right? But
like those games that have big online communities. So maybe you don't socialize within the game, but those communities definitely exist outside of the game.
Yeah. Or how about explorers? What games do you think then? We've already said Breath of the Wild. Do you have more?
Yeah. Well, I think I also said Elden Ring, so we'll throw that in here.
Yeah. The Final Fantasy series?
Final Fantasy series. I'm kind of thinking The Witcher 3 should go in here.
I think so.
That makes sense to me. I think
most open world games
anything
fit
that's
here.
like an open world RPG, I think fits here.
A dense open world. Let's word it like that.
Yes, yeah. I wouldn't put Pokemon down here.
No. Though I think there have been some more recent Pokemon games that fit, like Legends of Arceus.
That's a good point. Do you know what? I might take that back. I think that the original like Pokemon games that were released on DS, I think fit into Socializer or Explorers.
I think so, but I think they, as with everything, have a bit of everything.
Yeah.
The competitive aspect of Pokemon can put you right in the killer category.
Well, and that's what I'll say to game development, is that if you want a game that's successful to a broader audience, you might consider adding elements that speak to each of these things.
Yeah.
Or 3 of 4.
Yeah. So when we're talking about games in this way, we're attempting to make sure that you, as a player, can better understand who you are and what games you like to play. Just by thinking of your own personal category, we've listed 3 or 4, even 5 games that you might not have played yet that might be something useful for you to go pick up. And it's these tricks for understanding yourself as a player and understanding players as a whole that allows us to build better gaming communities focused around your interests and to give you a more rewarding experience. So one thing I wanted to talk about while here is to give a few examples of games that are really good at understanding their players, not fitting a category, but understanding their players, and games that admittedly really failed at it.
And we've talked about the games that fail this often get forgotten because this is another one of those categories where if this particular thing is done really poorly, the whole game kind of sucks.
Yeah, because it pulls in one group and it should be trying to pull in another. So the people who play it don't want to, and the people that would want to aren't playing it.
Exactly. I was struggling to figure out what when we said that, what was the first topic we talked about where it was like, you notice when this is bad.
Ooh, that was one of our first topics.
It was one of the first ones.
I think that was depth versus complexity, our actual first one.
Yeah.
When a game is complex and not deep, no one plays it.
No one plays it, yeah.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, so knowing your audience and building a game toward your audience, when it's done poorly, you actually don't hit a niche. You might just not hit the target.
Yeah, exactly. So to talk about games that I think understand their audience well, I think the first one I want to bring up, which tell me if you've played this one, Vi, is Stardew Valley.
Yes, I have played Stardew Valley.
How much have you played of it?
Not very much. I have a hard time with it because it's like you do like a handful of things and it's like go to bed and I'm like, okay.
Admittedly, I have hit over 300 hours in that game.
That's so many.
Over the course of like 8 worlds.
That's so many.
8 farms?
That's a lot of farms.
That's a lot of farms.
I may need to buy the Stardew Valley guide.
I am the Stardew Valley guide.
I'm going to get you a shirt that says I am the Stardew Valley guide.
So let's talk about Stardew Valley for a second.
Sure.
So we've been talking a lot about Bartle's taxonomy, and just to kind of stick to it as a guide,
yeah.
What type of player do you think Stardew Valley speaks to?
Oh, socializer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say socializer. A little bit of explorer in there, a little bit of achiever, but I wouldn't say any of killer. Right?
Yeah, yes. I mean,
there is the fighting in the mines, but even that is pretty bare bones.
That's what I was going to say, is like this is one of those games that like can pull a little bit from everywhere, right? Like if you introduce somebody who was specifically a killer to this game, they'd be like, "Oh, I love the mine." The rest of it, fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I loved the mine when I played it. I have that little bit of killer in me.
A little bit of killer in me.
Just my Joker moment.
That's the best way you could have said that. I also really like the mine, but I think it's just because I can see the progression really quickly.
Yeah.
And I think with the like growing stuff, I just feel like I've been there for 8 years.
Yeah.
I have a problem with like if games don't move quick enough, if I don't feel like I'm progressing.
Yeah. So we know that it kind of speaks to the socializer player who likes to achieve a bit and have this feeling of community in them. Mm. So how does Stardew Valley speak to those players? What does it do?
Well, we're talking about like specific mechanics
what
within the game.
What in the game would speak to those players?
Well, you've got kind of the obvious that some of those like achievements and quests or stuff are like, go talk to the guy and go interact with this person, right? And there are things like gifting things to other NPCs, to NPCs.
I like to think that if I'm playing Stardew Valley, I myself am an NPC in some ways.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get from Stardew Valley.
It is. Yeah. So you have the gifting element.
That's actually very important, is that you kind of feel like an equal with NPCs.
Yeah.
Right? You're not like big and all powerful. You're just like kind of there.
Yeah, you're a community member as much as anyone else.
And I think that is why I put this in Socializer and not Explorer.
Yeah, but let's think about this another way as well. What do you have to do in Stardew Valley? What are you required to do for the game? You hear a silence, don't you? Because you don't have to do anything in that game. Okay, not a single game mechanic is required.
I never want you to be a professor because that was a trick question.
It was a trick question. I wouldn't put it on a test, but I would put it in a podcast. So think about it like this. You don't like the mines. You don't like the combat. You don't like the losing health. So you don't
Maybe you find that really stressful.
Yeah, so you don't do it. So what do you do instead? Well, you go start digging up ores, or you start fishing to get bars.
Yeah.
You start buying materials from Clint to get the ores. You have many options if you don't like the mines. And sure, you're going to miss out on some of the game mechanics, but you don't have to do it.
Yeah, those game mechanics aren't present anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm reminded of seeing one person on one of the Stardew Reddits. I think it was like Farms of Stardew Valley.
Sure.
Right? Which was like modeled after like the people of New York Twitter,
Oh, okay, got it.
In Farms of Stardew Valley, someone posted their farm, and it was the entire farm map, like the base farm map, covered only in mushroom trees. And someone was like, hey, how do you make money? And he's like, I just cut down some of the trees when I need some cash. And that's it. That's all they did.
Okay.
And like, that was their thing. And someone was like, hey, you missed a corner. And he's like, oh no, and I have to go bring some seeds over there or something.
Yeah.
And that's how they played the game.
Yeah.
And I saw one person who only raised animals. Didn't grow any crops at some point, just only raised animals.
I know people who have like extensive sprinkler setups because all they do is grow like 3 different kinds of plants.
That's me.
Ah.
That's exactly what I do.
Very good.
For me, what I do when I play Stardew Valley is I go fishing. And I actually started speedrunning getting to level 10 fishing. My record is day 12 of spring.
That's
Level 10.
That's madly impressive.
Maxed out fishing,
Yeah.
day 12.
I think Stardew for me is one of those games that's like, yeah, it's kind of, it's not open world, like it's very much like a closed environment, but there's so much stuff to do within it that you still kind of get that like explorer vibe of like, I know every corner of this map, but as soon as you interact with more people, you like get more stuff to do and you like learn a little bit more about the world. It's very like, it's one of those like sweet little contained games.
Yeah, and the freedom to do what you want makes it especially attractive to a casual audience, the explorer type of person, and
Yeah.
even those who like other style of games.
It gives you a lot of player agency.
Exactly.
Like you are allowed to do lots of things.
So let's think of the opposite now. A game that is still successful at doing its, maybe doing is the wrong word, at bringing in its desired player base and making a satisfying game experience. A game where you can do really one thing and only one thing, and you have to do it well to have fun. I'm thinking of Rocket League, of all games.
Oh,
So
okay.
What is Rocket League? Can you tell me?
I can. Rocket League it's really entertaining. But it's basically soccer with cars.
Football if you're European.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's soccer with cars. That's it.
It's
With turbocharge for fun.
yeah, it's got some really fun feedback to it that I really enjoy, where it's like once you figure out kind of what you're doing and like the skill level, like there's a certain skill you have to achieve where it's actually fun, but then you get to like mess around like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what type of player would play Rocket League?
I kind of want to put killers
It is.
into Rocket League.
Because
Yeah.
in modern definitions, killer was changed to competitive.
Right.
And that's where it really starts to seep in there.
Yeah.
It's a competitive game. Fundamentally, it's an esport. It's actually like the esport nowadays. Effectively, it is a sport.
Yeah.
With cars,
Yes.
right? But Rocket League pulls in that competitive player type and basically like screams at them, this is exactly the type
Yeah.
of game you need.
Yeah, this is a game that's I'm just going to go back to definitions for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Just because we keep kind of jumping between all of these. So the killer is that kind of archetype is looking at acting and acting with players or acting on players.
Yeah, exactly. And how does Rocket League take action to give a better environment for these players? Well, it runs competitions.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
going to say you can play, like you can kind of play against the computer. You're allowed to.
You can. I have.
You
That's
totally
how I
can.
practice.
Yeah, but you can also find your like IRL friends and be like, hey, should we do a game of Rocket League tonight?
Yep.
And
Or
that's
play online if you want to go up the ranks.
100%.
Play in tournaments,
Yeah.
local tournaments, national tournaments, international tournaments, official esports.
God, I love the internet.
Yeah. But like, it provides a pure, fun, competitive environment. And at no point have they been like, here's a random social element. Here's a random exploration
No.
element.
They're like, you are playing Rocket League, and Rocket League is soccer with cars.
Yeah. You're playing soccer with cars. You want more competitive? Here's a new map.
Yeah.
Here's a new, cool, interesting design. That's it.
Here's a new way that you can like tweak your skills and your sensitivity.
Yeah. Here's more competitive.
Yes.
And that's what they do. This is the opposite of Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley lets you do whatever you want. It lets you pull from any like section of like game interest that you want. You can approach a game at whatever speed you like, with whatever intensity you like, in any achievement run categories, the community center, like speed runs, anything.
Yeah.
Rocket League has one thing, but it caters to those players amazingly.
It does one thing, but it does that one thing really well.
Yeah,
This is the opposite of a jack of all trades game.
exactly. It's just one specialist idea.
Master of one.
Just one.
You get one.
So we have an idea of how games cater to players. They either give lots of options to their players so that anyone can find something they love and do it fully, or they're specialists at one specific thing for one type of player. And both these games work because they listen to their player base and understand their player base, and they always ask themselves, how do I make this more fun for my players? So let's look at some bad examples now. So have you ever heard of DayZ?
I haven't.
So DayZ was a mod for the game Arma 2, which is meaningless to you. So let me go a little bit deeper. It took a military role-playing game. Effectively, it's like a military shooter, but people have formed real, actual military structures in that game with like thousands of real-life people playing a game where they're like a soldier sitting down for literally 2 hours on the grass with their gun pointed in one direction.
Oh.
Like, it's like a simulator for the military, but there's no NPCs. It's all players.
Everybody acts as a one NPC.
Yeah. And you can play it closer to like Call of Duty with like shooter games, but that role-playing element was big. And what someone did is they took the world, they took like the destroyed battlefield and kind of made it a little bit more apocalyptic in style, and added zombies, and added health bars, or not health, sorry, I'm like hunger bars and water bars and sleep bars, and said survive.
Anytime you add sleep bars to a game, I think it automatically gets 5 points worse.
Admittedly,
for me.
Originally, I actually felt it made the game better because it felt like a real survival game. It was a survival game, and it was multiplayer.
And this was still like, they didn't change any of the role play aspects of this.
No, and they didn't change any of the mechanics or any of the weapons. They put stuff on the ground for you to find and scavenge, but it was the beginning of the zombie survival genre as we know it today.
Okay, this makes more sense to me now.
Now,
Okay.
DayZ was a good game when it came out. Well, a good mod. They did actually release a full DayZ game, and it was pretty bad, admittedly. Not fun.
We're talking about the mod specifically?
The mod was good. The game had its problems because coding a game is much harder than a mod.
Yeah.
But DayZ ran into a problem in its development because it had a player base it wanted to cater to. Take a wild guess which one.
Well, what was it, Arma 3?
Well,
are
Arma
you asking
2?
me what, like, specific category of person?
Yeah, which category of person from our chart do you think they would have catered to for a zombie survival game?
I'm going to say either killers or achievers.
It was the killers.
Yeah.
Here's the problem when you make a big multiplayer game that's survival based and you cater to the killers. You start playing the game. You join into a server that's been around for a few days because that's how servers work. You spawn in, you get some loot, you get shot by someone halfway across the map who had the best gun in the game.
Yeah.
They come take your stuff.
Yeah.
You respawn, you get some loot, and you get shot from halfway across the map. Because these people have fundamentally built themselves around the idea of being the perfect PvP machine.
Yeah.
'Cause that's the point of the game.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, once you become the perfect PvP machine, what's left?
Yeah. This almost needed some, like, social elements so that you could do, like, players versus zombies and not player versus player and also versus zombies.
Yeah, and the problem was, like, you could form teams with other players. There was no formalized structure to it. You could just do it. And many people did. And they would build teams of 4, 5, 6 people and hunt everyone else.
Yeah.
Because it's The Last of Us. It's The Walking Dead. It's insert zombie movie here, right? Like,
Yeah.
And admittedly, when there is a scale of success on a limited map, that's not very fun. And that was the problem the game faced. It didn't cater to the other types of players. It didn't build systems to let those players succeed. You had to be a killer, and when your map is dominated by killers, no one can play your game.
Right.
Actually, in the original research of Bartle's taxonomy, he talks about this. He says when a game caters only to the killers, there's no new players, and the old players, when they get griefed finally by another killer, will probably leave. So the killers quite literally kill your player base.
Yeah.
And your game just ends. And socializers do the opposite. They push out the killers.
This is why nobody wants to play a game of murder hobos in a tabletop RPG.
Yeah.
This is specifically why.
Yeah,
Right?
because it kills the fun.
Yeah, you have absolutely no community at all. There's no other direction for you to go.
Yeah, just knife.
Knife. You get special ability gun.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
And the thing is, playing a killer-centric D&D game can be very fun. A very combat-focused D&D is fun.
Oh yeah, I've played several, like, monster hunting, like, specific games.
Yeah, or even war simulation in D&D.
Yeah.
It's great. But when you go to the murder hobo route, you get DayZ.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a game that catered to a player group too well.
Oh,
and destroyed
really
its
quick.
group.
I just want to, if anyone doesn't know what the phrase murder hobo means.
Oh yeah,
we should probably
Ooh.
just explain that. This is a kind of a trope within tabletop RPGs where players sometimes will go, well, I don't want to do the thing that the DM has like kind of laid out for us, right? What if we just killed stuff? And that's it. They just sort of rampage through the world killing things. And that's
wow,
the game.
the person running the game has given us this NPC with a really cool quest and offering us a lot of gold. What if we just killed him and took the gold?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, where's the fun in that?
Where's the fun in that?
Like, yeah, you
what-
could. Now
this
you're
is-
an enemy of the state.
This is why first NPC you meet has a silly little voice.
Now you're on the no-fly list.
Yeah. This is, yeah. Now you're on the no-fly list is, sorry, it totally threw me. Yeah, so just murder hobo versus accepting as a player, like, hang on, let me just take the MacGuffin from the DM and we'll just go do that,
Yeah.
right? Like, there's an understanding there of being a good player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So DayZ catered to its audience very well. The problem was that inherently destroyed their audience.
Mm-hmm.
So what about a game that doesn't understand its players? Have you ever heard of Dead Space?
No, I also haven't.
So Dead Space was a shooter, a third-person shooter game based in space, where you are a mechanic that has arrived to a ship that sent out a distress signal a few weeks ago that needed a mechanic.
First of all, that premise rules. I'm going to steal that for
Yeah.
some kind of tabletop RPG.
Keep in mind, you're the mechanic. You're the laborer,
Yeah.
the tradesperson.
Yes.
You come into the ship and there's no one there, and there's like corpses at the door.
This is a Doctor Who episode.
Kind of. And as you go through this ship, and I think you do more than just that one ship, but I actually haven't played through the full game. You get basically hunted for sport by something way more terrifying than Alien versus Predator. Like, constantly, they're called like xenomorphs, I think.
Yeah,
And it's
okay.
these massive, terrifying monsters that very much can one-shot you.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you have a gun? Yeah, you find a gun. Good luck using it for anything. You're using basically a sidearm versus the U.S. military.
So, what is the like objective of the game? Is it to fix the ship and then escape from the ship?
Basically, it's basically an
Okay.
escape, right? I actually haven't played enough of it to really understand the end premise of it. And it kind of plays like a shooter adventure style game, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's a horror game. Fundamentally,
Okay.
it is trying to be a horror game.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was one of the most critically acclaimed games of its time. I think it originally came out on the Xbox 360,
Sure.
right? There have been 3 Dead Space games. The third one came out over 5 years ago.
And I assume they're all horror games.
You would think.
Oh.
So this is where we start to get into the problem. So you build a horror game, kind of a semi-shooter horror game, aiming for that player base.
Right.
So you release a second game, and it is still a horror game, but now you really do have the ability to kill the enemies,
Okay.
which removes that
A little
existential
bit of
dread.
fear, yeah.
Yeah. And then the third game comes out, and it's just an action shooter.
Oh, we've totally lost horror by the time we get to.
By the third game,
Third
like, sure,
game.
they're creepy enemies.
Oh,
But zombies are
you've
creepy
lost the-
enemies.
You've lost the danger aspect.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this game series went from existential horror of like, you will not survive this,
Yeah.
to, it's a shooter. Were you a mechanic? Probably.
Well, that's disappointing.
Well, that's what most of the fans said too. Admittedly, the game was disappointing. And was it a good shooter? Well, kind of. It tried to pull in some of the old elements and didn't do so successfully. So it wasn't a great shooter, but it could have been a very
It
middle
could've-
of the
It
road,
could have been like a competent shooter.
a competent shooter.
Yeah.
But instead, everyone came in looking for their horror game, their horror
Yeah.
space shooter, and they got default shooter number 3.
Dang.
They got bad Halo.
Yeah.
So, what happened to the series? Well, there hasn't really been any new games since, as far as I'm aware, at least none worth talking about. Everyone online who mentions the series just kind of sounds depressed, right? And most of the actual media for the series is gone
Yeah.
because it didn't cater to its player base, so the people that it had faded away.
Yeah.
And the people that would like the new one didn't enter because they didn't want to play a horror game.
Yeah.
And the game series died.
This is again like the trap of a series of games, right? Where you try to build on the thing that you thought was the most successful in the last game, and your player base is very split maybe on what they think was successful about that game. And if you pay attention to your player base, you're not actually doing a sequel, you're doing sort of another game.
Like a spin-off.
Yeah.
So
really, this should be Dead Space and then Dead Space 2, the spin-off. Now you can kill it.
yeah, Dead Space the shooter, not Dead Space 2 kind of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
So this is kind of what happens.
Sorry.
Sorry?
Dead Space, half alive space. Alive space. Like, that's how they should have been named.
Yeah, no, exactly. So what we see here is good examples of understanding your players or understanding the variety of players. You know, Stardew gets variety, Rocket League gets its understanding.
Yes.
And then getting when understanding your players can lead to problems if you don't think about the consequences of it with DayZ, and completely failing to understand your players.
I'm going to compare this really quickly to like buying a tool for the job that you have and having a Swiss Army knife. Yeah, your Swiss Army knife can do lots of stuff, right? I have a Leatherman that I have all the time, that I use for most things. Did I put together half of my furniture with my Leatherman? Yes.
Probably shouldn't have.
Would it have been a lot easier to have a proper screwdriver or a drill? Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things. Like, you either make a game that's very specifically good about one thing, like Rocket League, or you try to do all of the things, and you might make
or be open to the players.
Or be open to the players, or do something that is successful in multiple things, like Stardew Valley, right? But Stardew Valley isn't a fighting game,
No.
right? Which makes that one element a little bit, I'm not going to say weaker, but less important.
Yeah, it still has what it wants to do. It still wants to be a casual game that you can play quickly if you want, but
Yeah,
fundamentally you can slow down at any point.
exactly.
So now I have a bit of a different question. We understand the types of players. We understand the systems for categorizing players that exist, and though they might be flawed, they're really good starting points. We've even examples of these games, how to succeed from different angles, how to fail from different angles. So I have one more question for you that should take up the rest of our episode, admittedly. How do we, as people who play tabletop RPGs, put this information to use, building our own games or playing in our own games with our friends, with our family, with people around us? How do we use this information? How do we gather this information? What do you think?
I think this is a really good place to start talking about what to do when you want to start a tabletop RPG with your friends.
I think
Right?
so. And we have plans to do our own Session Zero episode.
Absolutely.
But this is a good build into it.
I think this is one of those things that we'll probably talk about again in Session 0, but because it fits so well here, we'll start talking about it here. This is a really good place to start when you as a player have a group of friends, right? And
Imagine having a group of friends in
oh
2022.
my god, a group of friends?
2023, oh god.
Hang on, a group of friends who have the same free time every week?
And the same generalized interests?
Oh my goodness.
I'm trying not to laugh in the mic.
Yeah, sorry, this is very, I have a very special life where I have 2 regular, weekly games. But let's imagine that you're starting to try to put together a weekly game,
Yeah.
right? And you figured out that all of your scheduling works and you can always do Thursday nights,
Yeah.
right? I think this is where you start talking about, I always start this discussion with touchstones, right? And what I mean specifically by that is like, what type of media do we all like, right? Are you really interested? What was the last TV show that you like obsessed about, right? Like,
And why?
and why? Specifically why? So when I did a game with, I think I mentioned this to you. Like, the world was called Helenia.
I seem to recall it.
Okay. So this was a game that I started. It's supposed to be like a one-shot, like 6-session game. And our touchstones for it were stuff like Studio Ghibli, Breath of the Wild, stuff that was like really vibrant in color and kind of soft on combat, right? Like we were playing more Howl's Moving Castle, less Princess Mononoke, right? Like we were not as interested in combat as we were in roleplay. So when we sat down, we had these conversations and we sort of like did the map together to talk about like what the world looks like, what kind of narration style we were interested in. We came up with this world that was like really bright and like felt very full. And I'll juxtapose this with my family game, which is like very classic D&D, like The Witcher-esque. Like my family is monster hunters and they're going into the dangerous mountains where it's always foggy and they're gonna go kill something that they're going to get money
They're
for.
going to go kill God.
Yeah, they're going to go kill God. But we started these discussions with, what are you watching right now? Right? And so that kind of like, what kind of media do you like? Can we assign it into one of these 4 categories? That's going to be a really good starting place for your players.
And let's say you can't find any media that everybody agrees upon, right? Some people really liked story-based. Some people really liked cool action movies. And by that, I mean they watch Marvel, right?
Ooh,
I
big
mean,
dig.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Like, some people like Ghibli, soft, cuddly kind of movies, you know?
Yeah.
How do you cater to when there's different tastes? I have an idea for this one.
I'm listening.
The first thing that I've always done is I've run a basic game with elements of each and watched how my players interacted with them. A pretty good one is my game that actually turned into a full-scale game where I had my players playing through the D&D starter set originally. I think it's the 5e starter set, which has the Lost Mines of Phandelver, that quest
Yeah,
line.
this is the one where you are hired. There's like a wagon and you're hired to guard it, and you go into the mountains.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to catch up with the guy who hired you.
And you find
when you
the
get
horse
there,
dead
the
on
horse
the
is
ground.
dead. Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's that one.
Yeah.
And what did I notice with my players as we played through? Initially, my players liked the combat. They would go from room to room, fighting enemies, and so I would give more interesting combat challenges and give them scenarios where their abilities were more useful.
Right.
But as they got used to the game and we played the game a little bit more, I found that my players started interacting with the NPCs a bit more. So what did I do? I added more dialogue, more options to talk with NPCs, and a few more interesting NPCs would come into town every now and then.
Yeah.
Over time, they started interacting with the quests more deeply. Now, these were 2 players who hadn't played much of D&D or tabletop RPGs at all at the time. So when they started interacting with quests more, I added detail to the quests. I made the quests more engaging for them. And what I always did was I always had a baseline that screamed, there's more if you dig in. And maybe I didn't have more at the time initially, but I left the door open for it. So as my players interacted with things together, I myself would go and add more detail there, add more data, right?
Yeah. This is where I go, okay, I've got to improvise a whole bunch of stuff real quick.
Yeah, pretty much.
I will say, too, that this is the point where you choose what tabletop RPG you're playing, right?
Now, I think most people tend to default to the D&D 5e nowadays, but there's more. There's a lot more.
There's been some things that we've decided not to talk about in this show.
Yeah.
That has actually driven people to look at more tabletop RPGs and has been more successful than just players saying that people should play other games.
Yeah, and to give a picture of this to help you understand the idea of more systems, Vi, what do you look for in a game? You are going to play a new RPG. Let's say you have the option and the time to join a new game tomorrow.
Great.
What would you want from it?
Well, things that I like are, narratives that are nuanced, but, reasonably uncomplicated, right? I'd like to be able to know that the actions that I'm taking, there's always kind of a gray option, but that I'm always making, like, a good choice. So that means that I really like roleplay games. I also like kind of using, like, tabletop RPGs, and I'm like, we're going to play a roleplay game. I like to be able to use role-playing as a strategy to, like, diffuse a situation or to solve things.
Yeah.
Right?
So I would ask you, do you know of a game system that is particularly useful for that?
Yeah. Blades in the Dark is very much like this. This is a game that I really like because the sessions are kind of structured like you go do a job, you go do a heist, and then you don't really know what's going to happen on that heist. Like, basically at the table, you make up a thing that you're going to do based on, like, kind of some world information you might have, right? So, your GM might go, okay, so you know that this other crew has this thing that you want, and you know that, like, the mint just brought in, like, new material you could go steal, right? But at the table, you decide what you're doing. You go, we're going to do this thing right now, and then you jump directly into action. There's none of the, like, D&D planning of, like, let's go shopping before we do the thing. You're just in it, and then if you find a situation where you need, a bomb, then you do a flashback scene to see how successful you were like making it. You do the Ocean's 11, like we're in the job and we're doing the thing, and then you get the flashback to when you were setting up the thing that you're happening now. Right?
As a game mechanic, that's actually really cool.
Really cool.
It must be a little disorienting.
It can be, but that's solved kind of by like good communication of like, we are now going to do a flashback.
Play the game well kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's structured as a conversation between the GM and the player in such a way that you'll be like, I'd like to do a flashback to this, right? And then you talk about what that flashback kind of is, and then you go sort of play through it and you roll for it to see how successful it was.
Right.
But I will say that it has a very specific atmosphere. It is very much like Six of Crows, like sort of Victorian thieves and like drudgery and that sort of thing.
Right.
But there's also ghosts and you're very close to like the spectral veil. Like it's very specific, which is why I'd say start with touchstones and then play something to see where your players kind of land naturally.
Right.
And then pick a system.
And I can throw my own ideas of systems out there. I'm
sure.
a math physics student who also studies computer science. What do I like? Numbers.
Yes.
I like numbers. I like systems. I like coming to exacts.
Yeah.
I DM'd a D&D game once where I calculated how much of a toxin for like organic matter would have to be put into a barrel of like alcohol to basically dissolve, to react all of the toxins, or how much alcohol would need to react all the toxin with organic matter and avoid the toxin being dangerous to touch, because like on touch dissolves matter kind of thing.
Right, okay, I understand.
Right? Like I calculated that in the moment. That's what I do.
You were like, I need to figure this out exactly.
And I like cool systems, and I like seeing numbers go up and getting rewards and using them to interact with cool systems.
Yeah.
So what do you think I should play? Because I have the answer. I think I need to play, admittedly, Pathfinder.
Yeah. I was actually going to say Pathfinder.
That's
yeah.
exactly what Pathfinder is.
Or 4.5? 3.5?
3.5.
3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
And Pathfinder was built off of 3.5 because they liked that aspect
So there's
of it.
some stuff that you're going to be very familiar with.
Yes. Yeah. But for me, that bit of number enjoyment, that high level of customization despite high level of numerical complexity.
Yeah, and that high level of like I'm going to say competency with complexity.
Yeah.
Right? You like knowing exactly what each thing is going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, Pathfinder's a good system. So there is this level of when you're playing tabletop RPGs, making games with your friends, sometimes it is right to pick a system that better suits your environment.
Oh, for sure.
Now, can you build anything in a generic kind of open-ended system? Yeah,
Absolutely.
probably.
Here's the ideal system. You sit down with your players and you're like, okay, how much time do we have in our lives for this, right? Do we want to play every week? Do we only have next Saturday and then we want to put it away? Like, how much time do we have? Touchstones? Or like, what have you been playing recently? That kind of thing. Maybe a quick discussion about like, what you look for in a game, right?
Yeah.
So not touchstone specific, but like,
Asking your players,
yeah.
what do you want from this experience?
like Gaia would tell me, I like numbers, right? And I would go, well, I really like interacting with NPCs, for example.
Right.
Right? And then maybe picking a different system for that. And like, depending on how complex you need that system to be, that's going to inform, that's going to be informed by time, right?
Right.
Like,
And familiarity.
and familiarity, for sure. I know players who like, you and I could pick up a game of D&D like now, right?
Yeah. And
Like-
admittedly, you and I, because of our experience, could pick up more complex systems like Pathfinder.
For sure. But if I'm thinking about, I had two of my friends be interested in D&D, and I was just trying to show them what a tabletop role-playing game kind of looks like.
Right.
So I was like, okay, we're not going to bother with a system. Everybody sit down. I don't have anything planned. Here's how the conversation around this game works. I'm going to narrate stuff. I will probably then ask you a question about what you do. You then kind of narrate something back to me or speak in character or do the like third person thing of like my character says something along the lines of this if you can't think of like specific dialogue.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Which makes sense. And then we'll just like build a little story. So we did that for like an hour, came up with something I thought was really cool, and that gave them just like a good place to start to understand. And then we can have the conversation about like, more specifically, would we like to play Wanderhome or do we want to play Blades in the Dark?
So, when talking about understanding your players, I've gotten 3 main ideas out of this. And I think summarizing these would be good for both listeners and myself, right? So, part 1, talk to your players about who they are, what they do, what they enjoy, how they take in media, their hobbies, their interests,
Yeah.
what they love, what they don't love.
Maybe what they need in their life right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And understand what they're looking for. And this is also a very good idea for if you have an idea of like plot that you want to do, you make sure the person playing can join in with the plot. You don't want someone who is looking for a romance heavy game to be joining into
A
the
Warhammer
Matrix,
game. Like, yeah.
right?
I will also say this is a good place to, if you have specific tools like consent checklists and stuff like that, this is kind of where that starts to happen, right? Kind of at the tail end of the step 1.
Yeah. And now step 2 is to more directly ask your players, what do you want from this game? What type of game do you want to play? What do you want to do? What experiences do you want to have? What do you want to get out of it?
I think also how much do you want to accomplish in a session, right? Because something like, D&D, you don't actually get through very much stuff.
A single session could be in-game an hour sometimes, maybe a third of a dungeon.
Yeah, whereas something like Monster of the Week, Blades in the Dark, Wander Home if you kind of play it with progress in mind. Those games are structured to be kind of episodic, right? You're meant to get through. I'm going to talk about Monster of the Week for a second. This is like a Supernatural, like a Buffy episode, right? This is, oh, goodness gracious, something weird is happening. Because I'm a monster hunter, I think it's a monster. Let's solve the mystery, figure out what the monster is, figure out how to kill it, have an interaction, which is the monster killing scene, and then, we'll close it and shelf it, right? And then sometimes we'll have like big season arcs
Mission
and stuff.
accomplished. Play the victory music.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then, we play this out over a season. We do like a TV movie and we just do like one game of it. Cool, right?
And you need to know what your players want from a game. And if you're dealing with new players or players who are unsure, step 1 is meant to help a lot with that. And also thinking of it as a form of, if people are unsure, give them a learning experience. Let them experience something they haven't done before so they can get these ideas.
For sure.
They can understand themselves. Or maybe show them this episode. And then for the third way of understanding your players, designing a good game, get feedback from each game. Maybe during the game, maybe more direct by asking them. Find out what people like and what they don't like. Build more of the things they like, build less of the things they don't.
Yeah.
Build enough for the things they like to still have the support set it needs, but give them what they like if you're a DM and what you like to do as well as the DM. You have to understand yourself in this process.
And on the flip side, if you are a player in one of these games, it's really hard for a DM to walk away from a game with the feedback of like, that was good, thanks. So if you're a player, when you're thinking about messaging your DM to be like, hey, thanks for DMing tonight, I had a really good time, you're more than welcome to add a little bit like, I really enjoyed the scene between this character and this NPC. I really loved the combat, or I really loved this puzzle, or I really think that this mystery that you're building is something special, right? Those things are more specific than just, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can look back at my own games. You and I play a game where I attached really heavily with the lore of the world and a couple of battles that I did. And I pulled back during some more of the like interaction roleplay moments and let other people play. Because I'm struggling to play my own character because I put myself in a corner. But
you put yourself in a box.
There are things that I love in that game that I've been interacting with. And I've been showing you when I'm interacting with it to kind of make it clear to you that I like it. With you as the DM, me as the player. Right? So for you as a listener, to understand yourself and understand others, think about what you like, think about what you want, and think about your past experiences and use them to get a list of, this is the type of game I like, this is the type of game I dislike. And the same is true for video games. What video games have you enjoyed in the past? What ones have looked cool that you wanted to play? What video games, like conceptually, what type of experience are you feeling like now?
You might go, hey, what book did I just read that I really liked? Is there a game that is that model?
Exactly.
I did the opposite after I finished Breath of the Wild. I was like, what books are like Breath of the Wild? And then I read some stuff just to see if I liked it.
To see if it's kind of your general area.
Yeah.
And with that, I think that covers most of our discussion on understanding yourself, understanding your players. So, as a bit of a clue up to all of that, look into your interests, look into the interests of those around you, and interact with it. Do a bit of research into it. Google is a fun tool for this one. Like, there's lots of interesting things and weird drama about past systems for understanding people. Go do a Myers-Briggs test if you feel like it.
Yeah, go onto a Reddit thread of your favorite video game and just go, hey, anybody have any suggestions? I love this game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But now you can be more specific about it. You can say, I love this aspect of this game. Any suggestions based on the fact that I love Breath of the Wild and I really like exploring? Suggestions.
Exactly.
Cool.
So that covers everything I have. I've been Gaia.
I've been Vi.
And if you want to hear more from us or listen to past episodes, tune in live every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic on CHSR 97.9 FM in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And if you're online, you can listen live at chsrfm.ca or on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next time.